Hi there, it's Mrs. Lindquist. So we're going to continue with our graphing of a sine translation. So go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with the amplitude period, phase shift, and vertical shift. Pause the video and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, so when we look at our A value is a -1 in this example. So our amplitude is going to be the absolute value of -1, which is +1. And we also know because the A value was negative, that the sine graph is going to be flipped. And what I mean by that is any y value that was positive is going to be negative, and any negative value is going to be positive. So what about our period of this graph? Period is our 2 pi divided by b. So in this case, we're going to have 2 pi divided by 1. So our normal period of 2 pi radians. Does this graph have a phase shift? You can see here we have x plus pi over 4, which is like minus a negative. So we're actually going to be going left pi over 4. And lastly, our vertical translation, we see a -2 at the end, so the graph is going to shift down 2. Again, I'm going to look at the graph of y equals negative sine x. I'm just taking out my translation. Okay, since we're starting with a sine graph, we're going to start with a 0. But since our a value is negative, we're going to go to a minimum of -1, back to a 0, to a max, and back to a 0. And it's going to take 2 pi to complete this cycle. So if we split 2 pi in half, we're going to get pi. Half a pi between 1 and 2 pi is 3 pi divided by 2. We're going to make it our parent function. Okay, so I'm going to label this out. We're going by half pi's. And I'm going to graph my parent function. So we have 0, 0. Pi over 2, we're at -1. Back to 0, to a max, and back to a 0. And I'm going to do a little dash line to show that this has not been translated yet. The original midline of our graph is the x-axis. And now we're going to be shifting our graph down 2 units. So I'm going to take my midline on my graph. And we're also, besides shifting the points 1 down, we are also shifting them pi over 4 to the left. How much is pi over 4? Well, if one box is half pi, then a half a box would be a quarter pi. So we are going to be shifting a half box left and 2 down. So we're going to go from this point right here. It's going to go a half box to the left for a quarter pi, and it's going to go down 2. So that point will end up right there. And we're going to do the same thing with our other points. So this point, again, is going to go 1 half box left, down 2. And the same thing with the rest. So our graph is going to look like this. There's one cycle, and if we wanted to graph a second cycle, we could do that. We'll just follow our pattern. And there's the second cycle. So we have 2 cycles of our translated sine graph. Okay, so example 2 says write an equation for each translation. So we want to take y equals sine theta and translate it pi units down. So about 3.14 unit down. So go ahead and write an equation that you think will do that. So notice if there's no parentheses around the minus pi, the graph is a vertical shift of pi units down. If we were to put a parentheses, would this mean the same thing? So this would actually mean, since we're taking the sign of this quantity, this would actually mean that it's shifting pi to the right. So in any case, this is the correct answer. All right, go ahead and try out example B. 2 times the cosine of x shifted pi over 4 units right and 3 units up. So pause the video and try it out. So if we want to go pi over 4 units to the right, we're going to have to do x minus pi over 4, because it's always minus the horizontal translation, and then up 3. We're going to be going to the right, pi over 4, and 3 units up. Okay, so for example 3, it's identify the amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. So again, we're just kind of going over those key aspects of these graphs without actually making the graph. So go ahead and pause the video and try these out. Okay, so let's see how you did. So for amplitude, for our first graph, our A value is -1. So our amplitude should be the absolute value of -1, which is 1. And the graph is flipped. So our cosine is going to look like a valley versus a hill. For example B, our amplitude is going to be 4. The absolute value of 4 is 4. So how about the period? 2 pi divided by b. In this example, this is our b value. Our b value is 3, so our period is 2 pi over 3. And for this one, our b value is 1. So our period is just going to be 2 pi. Okay, let's talk about phase shift. This one looks like it has a pi over 2 to the right phase shift. In this one, we have theta plus pi, which is like theta minus a negative pi. So we're actually going to be shifting left pi. And the last one is vertical translation. This one is shifting up 10 units. And this one is shifting down 1. And that's it for our basic translations. All right, you guys, have a great weekend. Bye.